All right, it's back here on the 1978 Toyota pickup. Trying to get the rest of the suspension squared away. So I had made a mistake. So when I was reading about how to get the bar set up with the angle that you should have on the bottom bar, I was reading that it said downhill, and I was reading that down from the front of the vehicle. And so, running from running down this way from the front of the vehicle, but it's actually the other direction. And so they're supposed to run, downhill from the rear end, which, that doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody say downhill in that way? But whatever. And so I was, playing around with this and trying to get the angles back right. So it meant that I had to move the brackets on the rear end, and I had to move the brackets back here as well. And so, I just had little tacks on there. So just hit those tacks off and then had to shift everything around. It was lame to have to redo all that work, but, it's where it's supposed to be now. One thing that was a bit of a bummer is I would have liked to use the bottom hole. And then that way, if I ever wanted to get more angle out of it, I could, move it up to the top hole, and that would get me more angle without shifting anything around. But that bottom hole is so low that there's no way I would have been able to have this bracket on the frame at all. And so it would have shifted the whole contraption, down, like another inch or so. And, I'm already, kind of at the bottom edge of the frame on that side and, past the frame on this side. And so, there's no way I could have moved those brackets down any further. Like I said, I'd like to have them lower and then be able to use the bottom hole on this bracket, but that ain't going to happen. So the angle that I got there is the angle I got. So, I set it up with 1 degree of angle in it. And so, what I was reading is you could do neutral all the way down to 2 to 4 degrees. And so I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. So I'll just go with 1 and we'll see what happens. I mean, there's so many ways to tune this, and I've got so much other stuff to do that I got to start somewhere, and 1's where I'm starting. And so got all that squared away. I did have another issue where this bar is supposed to be at like a 90-degree angle to the rear end, and this one on the left hand side was totally fine. And then this one on the right-hand side, it was sort of skewed going sort of this direction. And so I had the bracket too far inboard, and it was kind of getting those angles all screwed up. And so so that took a little bit of, figuring out why in the world the rear end was shifting weird, and it was just because I didn't have that in alignment. So now everything's good. Like I got a nice good alignment on both sides. Everything perpendicular and square and everything. The other piece I was working on was the panhard bar. So that bolts here to the top of the rear end. And I just got a couple of bolts in it right now because I was just mocking it up. And so that bolts in here, and then it bolts to the other side. And so this was giving me a little bit of a fit because it was shifting the rear end way more than it should. And so I was trying to figure out what was going on, and it was because I had this bracket too low. And so, after I read through it, you're supposed to have the mounting point equal in height. And so I had this lower down by about 1 inch. And so it was lower than the one here that was on the rear end. And that was causing more angle, and it was causing it to shift a lot more than it was supposed to. So I had to shift that down, and that helped. And then the other thing I found out, not, because I'm smart, because I done made a bunch of mistakes, is that you actually need to set up the rear end to accommodate the fact that when it's going to travel through its motion, that panhard bar is going to pull the rear end towards the side that it's mounted to. So that arm actually gets shorter. So as it's pivoting, it'll actually get shorter through its range. And so as it's moving up, and it's going to pull it, and it's going to pull that rear end towards wherever you have it mounted on the frame. And so I had two problems going on. One, I had it lower, which meant that it was already at an angle. And so then when it got pulled through its arc, it was pulling it even at a tighter arc and moving it a bunch. So I moved it up level. That helped. And then the other thing you got to do is you have to shift the whole rear end away from the frame a little bit. So that way when it pivots, it doesn't have such an extreme movement to one side. And so it's going to kind of start out its life, you know, 1/8 of an inch away from the frame. And then as it goes through the arc and it compresses, it's actually going to bring it more into a center line. And then as it goes even more extreme, it might go 1/8 of an inch the other direction. So you end up having like a 1/4 inch play left to right, versus if you have this totally flat, you're going to get the full 1/4 inch only to one direction. And so that messed with me a whole bunch. And, you know, I just had to do some digging and figuring out why it was moving more than I thought it was supposed to. And it's just the nature of the beast and my lack of understanding. So I had to educate myself a little bit, but it's working well now. You know, these mounts that are on this side, because I had to get them up higher, you could see they're now above the frame a little bit. And, you know, I had to get all that stuff welded in place. And, you know, what I didn't want to have is where I wanted to bolt this in place and have the bushing in here, get a whole bunch of heat in it, and then melt the bushing. And so that would have been an absolute disaster. And so I just took the bolt that was here and then sized it to be the same size of the bushing with the inside nut, and then just tightened down the outside one. So this way that, you know, dimension here wasn't going to get messed up when, you know, I need to go and slide that bushing back in there. So did that, and, you know, that seemed to work out just fine. As far as this height that's here, I think I might end up running into some problems with hitting the bottom of the bed. And so this height, I didn't have much of a choice. It had to be at that height. Now I could cut that down, but if you look, like, there's not a whole ton of material here. So if I start cutting into this, like, this would be real narrow. And then, you know, this angle ends up creating like a lot of structure for this. And so if I cut this all the way out, I'd end up losing a lot of strength out of that bracket. And so I don't really want to cut it. And then I honestly don't think cutting this one's going to help me, because this one is at the exact same height, which means, like, if this one can't go anywhere, and if it hits, well, that one's going to hit also. So I think I'm going to have to, you know, clearance the bed a little bit, because when I was looking at the mounts, these mounts here, they're flush with the frame, and they were just these little tiny, like, you know, maybe like 3/8 inch thick bushings that were mounting the bed to the frame. And so there's not a lot of distance between the bed and the frame. And so, like, I look at this and I'm like, well, there's no way, like, it's definitely going to hit. So we'll see what ends up happening there, but I'm pretty sure at full compression, that's going to be a problem. This piece here, and then, you know, I think this is going to be even much more of a problem, because, you know, the suspension is going to travel about 2 inches. And so if I look up here 2 inches, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be running into the bed. So we'll see. I mean, that's not great, but, you know, that bed's all dented and banged up and everything. So I might just hammer it out in order to get it to clearance here and over there. because it's all beat up and dinged and bent already. So I don't think I'm gonna care that if I have to hammer out a little bit of it. Big deal. So good progress here. I did get the panhard bar welded up, and so this is the adjustable side of it that mounts to the frame, and then this is the piece that mounts to the rear end. And you can see what I did here is I wrapped a wet rag around the end of it. I just got done welding it, so it's it's probably not hot anymore. But just like I was saying on the other side, what I didn't want to have happen is get to welding this, melt that bushing, and then have a bad day. So I just wrapped a wet rag around the whole contraption, and then this way, it's lukewarm or something, but you could definitely put your hand on it. And these bushings, there's no way they got damaged. So just trying to be careful with that kind of stuff, because all this crap's brand new and I don't want to ruin it. So all right, well, I'll get this thing mounted back in the car. The next thing I got to do is finish weld these brackets that are all down here. So I'll take those bars out, and then I got to finish weld the brackets that are on the rear end. And I'll probably end up putting like a piece of angle iron or something in here, and get that spot welded in place, because I don't want me to get a whole bunch of heat and weld on this bracket and end up bending this rear end. So I might get a couple of pieces of angle iron welded to it around here, in order to keep that thing straight, so I don't end up bending that housing by getting a bunch of heat in it. So all right, yeah, making some good progress here, and keep after it. All right, thanks. See you in the next one.